When the Swedish Academy takes the stage to award the Nobel Prize in Literature, they highlight works that capture essential truths about the human condition. In 2024, they gave it to a story about a woman who abruptly stops eating meat. Han Kang's novel, The Vegetarian, centers on an ordinary housewife named Yeong-Hye. After experiencing a visceral, blood-soaked dream, she absolutely refuses to consume animal flesh. Critics often read this inciting incident as an eco-feminist parable about human consumption, or a straightforward psychological thriller tracing a woman's inward descent into madness. Instead, her sudden resistance acts as a direct catalyst, exposing the deep panic of the systemic structure that surrounds her. We can examine this through a 2025 analysis by scholars Panta and Adhikari in the NPRC Journal. Their paper argues Yeong-Hye's dietary rebellion interrogates the fragility of the Korean patriarchal hierarchy, testing how it reacts to female autonomy. Yeong-Hye's transformation acts as a mirror, reflecting the inherent violence of this supposedly normal men trying to contain her. To understand the mechanics of this panic, we have to look at how a patriarchy functions. Intersectional feminist theorist Bell Hooks defines patriarchy as an active political and social force demanding male dominance. Han Kang maps Hooks' theory onto the male gaze, treating it as an active mechanism to possess, define, and control female identity. The novel splits this patriarchal control into three distinct vectors, represented by the three male narrators. First is her husband, demanding domestic utility. Second, her brother-in-law, seeking aesthetic commodification. And third, her father, representing militarized violence. What follows is a forensic look at how a single, quiet act of resistance shatters all three of these structural pillars. Mr. Chong marries Yeong-Hye precisely because he believes she is the most ordinary woman in the world. He expects a subservient wife who wakes up at 6 a.m. to prepare rice and fish. His gaze values her purely for her domestic utility. When she removes meat from the refrigerator and refuses to cook or eat it, he cannot process it as an ethical or personal decision. He registers it solely as a failure of her purpose. Mr. Chong possesses a profound psychological detachment. He views her bodily agency as a personal slight, a direct insult meant to humiliate him and damage his social standing. He explicitly claims the role of the injured party. He says, quote, "Now don't go making me out to be some kind of villain. Anyone can see that I'm the real victim here." He twists her passive agency into aggression against his comfort. Later, he silently watches and permits his in-laws to force-feed Yeong-Hye against her will. He requires her absolute subjugation to maintain his own fragile sense of masculine identity. The domestic gaze proves exceptionally brittle. Because his authority relies entirely on her compliance, her quiet deviation causes his illusion of control to instantly collapse into anxious victimhood. The second vector attempts to assert control through a higher cultural pretense. Yeong-Hye's brother-in-law masks his desire for dominance behind the veneer of a high-minded video art project. His gaze is strictly visual. He becomes obsessed with her body, fixating on a pale blue mark, reducing her entirely to a canvas. This culminates in him painting heavy flora over her naked body. The paper clarifies that this project serves as an effort to capture and commodify what he deems her primal essence. Through the lens of the aesthetic gaze, patriarchy offers women a trap. They are granted value and labeled beautiful, but only in exchange for surrendering their autonomy to male observation. The rupture occurs when Yeong-Hye refuses to play the passive object. Her body, painted in flowers, becomes an active resistance, defying his artistic instructions. Denied absolute ownership over his muse, his artistic facade disintegrates. He descends into unhinged desperation and aggression, proving his art was always a mechanism for sexual and psychological control. The aesthetic gaze shatters the moment a woman reclaims her body as her own property, leaving the voyeur completely powerless. When psychological and aesthetic pressures fail, patriarchal anxiety escalates to its final, most brutal form. Yeong-Hye's father is a strict, aggressive Vietnam War veteran. His military identity dictates his domestic life. To him, the family unit is a chain of command. He views his daughter's refusal to eat meat not as an eccentric dietary choice, but as a hostile rebellion that must be forcefully suppressed. This leads to the traumatic climax, where her father physically overpowers Yeong-Hye, attempting to force a piece of pork into her mouth as she struggles. This aligns precisely with bell hooks' framework. When a patriarchal system exhausts its social and psychological tools, it drops the pretense of order. It defaults to raw, physical trauma to reassert its dominance. But even here, the father fails. Despite his overwhelming physical strength, he cannot conquer her inner will or force her to swallow. The father's violence reveals the ultimate symptom of patriarchal helplessness, a system lashing out in panic as it realizes it has lost control. While the men in the story disintegrate, Yeong-Hye succeeds. Scholar Rose Casey frames this success through a concept called willed arboreality. Willed arboreality is a philosophical rejection of human patriarchal violence. Yeong-Hye begins to exhibit the traits of plant life, profoundly peaceful, standing in the sun, refusing to consume or be consumed. Becoming vegetable offers the perfect defense mechanism, leaving nothing for the domestic, aesthetic, or militarized cases to exploit. This arboreality operates as a profound, liberating act of non-mastery, starving the patriarchal machine of the friction it needs to function. This narrative plays out against the backdrop of a rapidly modernizing South Korea, where rigid, traditional gender roles are actively clashing with contemporary female agency. As Panta and Adhikari point out, the collective disintegration of the husband, the brother-in-law, and the father reveals a fatal flaw. Patriarchal structures are inherently unstable because their existence depends entirely on subjugation. The vegetarian proves that resistance does not require loud, violent confrontation to dismantle a hierarchy. Han Kang successfully unmasks the male gaze as a suffocating, fragile tool that shatters the moment a woman claims absolute ownership over her own body.